Smith, Director of NOAA's VLab, here for another edition of the VLab Forum. I'm joined in the VLab studios with John Chattel, who is our technical and production manager. We're coming to you live from beautiful downtown Silver Spring, Maryland, in the shadow of the giant acorn. Today, we have a very interesting topic based on radar. Remind everyone that the VLab Forum, a purpose of these presentations is to share new and upcoming technology science that is moving its way towards weather service operations, NOAA's operation, with the idea that as we learn of these things earlier, the better, so that we can socialize them, vet them, ask questions, find funding for them, etc. The earlier, the better. So the format of these talks is about 30 minutes or so of content, followed by question and answer. When we get to the Q&A portion, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature of the GoToWebinar. If you'd like to ask a question, you raise your hand, and then John Chattel will unmute you so you can ask your question directly to the presenter. You can also use the chat feature to do the same thing, and John will relay your question on your behalf. A reminder as well that these sessions are recorded, and we will upload the recording to the VLabForum website shortly after the conclusion of today's session. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Steve Cox, who's going to speak about the new MRMS dual pole based quantitative precipitation estimate product, which is specifically or explicitly utilizing attenuation in it. Steve's going to be presenting this, but there's a number of collaborators out at NSSL and SIMS, University of Oklahoma, including Lin Tang, Yadong Wang, Jian Zhang, Alexander Rishkov, Peng Fei Zhang, and Ken Howard, the illustrious Ken Howard, who I see is on the webinar. So without further ado, go ahead, Steve. I understand your voice is a little bit strained, so we heard you clearly a second ago, so just take it easy and the floor is yours.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And what I'd like to do is, I'm on slide 2 here, I'd like to give a short review of operational radar QPE past 20 years or so. Up until about 2010, radar QPE primarily consisted of the use of a single reflectivity to rain rate relationship, or RZ, to estimate precipitation amounts. During the warm season, convective RZ was often used, most likely 300 times R to the 1.4. During the cool season, there was a list of RZs that were available, but any RZ changes were forecaster initiated, and it was applied to the entire field of view of the radar. Between 2010 and 2014, dual pole and MRMS transitioned to operations QPE algorithms that automatically assign a rain rate relation depending upon the echo classification. Below the melting layer, dual pole used a RZ and ZDR and R-KDP relationship. Within and above the melting layer was primarily RZ. Meanwhile, for MRMS, we used multiple RZs, and we applied a bright band correction within and above the melting layer. Now, despite the advances, the need continued for rain rate relations less sensitive to the cloud microphysics that spawned the precipitation. RZ relations were sensitive to Z calibration and drop size distribution changes. While RZ and ZDR was not as sensitive to DSD changes, it was quite sensitive to calibration challenges. And RF-KDP may not be as sensitive to calibration challenges, but it cannot capture all the DSD variability, and it can be noisy for lower reflectivities below 40 dBz or so. So Alexander Rishkov and Yadong Wang published a couple of reports back in 2014 suggested there'd be good potential in using specific attenuation to estimate rainfall. They cited some of the advantages of this new technique would be it would be more or less immune to calibration, partial blockage, attenuation, and wet radome challenges. It would also have higher spatial resolution than RF KDP estimates, and it'd be less sensitive to the drop size distribution variability than RFZ and RF KDP. The caveats was that we must use RZ within and below, we must use RZ within and above the melting layer, and when delta PDP is less than 3 degrees, or the change in differential phase along a radial is less than 3 degrees. And we need to use ARSA KDP within hail cores. And the reason why is specific attenuation values can get quite large in the presence of ice, and that would result in erroneous rainfall rates. I'm not going to go into detail of these equations I'm showing right here, but just for your information, specific attenuation A is a function of radial reflectivity and path integrated attenuation terms. And all you really need to calculate specific attenuation is radial reflectivity along a radar radial, as well as the span of differential phase along it. What's key in this technique is this term that contains path integrated attenuation, because the path integrated attenuation is nothing more than the amount of signal loss that's occurred to the radar signal, in this case primarily due to raindrops along the radial. Now this term is actually equal to a parameter called alpha, then multiplied by the total span of PDP. So using all that math, it's pretty fancy. What we do is we calculate our specific attenuation fields, and then we use a power law to estimate the rainfall rate, where the constants were optimized for the S-band radars. So basically, using the methodology of Alexander's paper in 2014, a prototype algorithm was developed. But key to actually getting these specific attenuation fields is the requirement of estimating the parameter alpha, which is more or less just a ratio of the path integrated attenuation divided by the PDP span. That alpha must be estimated in real time. Now that can be a challenge when you consider a few things. So within a precipitation event, case study analysis has shown that alpha will vary quite considerably. So I'm going to show you just with my cursor. I've got a schematic here on the right of a conceptual MCS, and with it the leading convective line, and then the stratiform rain behind it. And basically within the convective line, you tend to have an area where there's larger drops involved into there. And from case study analysis, alpha tends to be smaller in this area. And then within the stratiform rain, where there's smaller droplets and actually higher concentrations of them, alpha tends to be larger. So we have a whole radar field of view. What are the options we consider in actually estimating alpha in real time? And the first one was, let's just assume that alpha is spatially and temporally fixed throughout the precipitation event, and let's just hope the radial reflectivity would be enough to modulate the specific attenuation fields and actually give you relevant rain rates. The next option is that we can estimate the alpha for the radar field of view is basically just spatially. We're just going to use an average alpha for the entire field of view and then update it for each elevation scan, each half-degree elevation tilt. And basically, this assumes that alpha sticks throughout the space of the radar field of view, and it also assumes that the PDP span and radial D itself is enough to modulate the specific attenuation fields so that you get relevant rain rates. That's the key here. Then the third option we looked at for a brief amount of time was we could estimate alpha by radar echo classification of the precipitation, whether it was convective or stratiform. But this required further research before it could really be adequately evaluated. So for the prototype that I'm talking about now, we calculated rain rates from specific attenuation fields where alpha was estimated via options 1 and 2. So what is the physical significance of the parameter alpha? Well, generally, higher concentrations of smaller raindrops generally lead to higher alpha values. And that would be a regime that's more generally associated with tropical-like rainfall. Lower concentration of larger raindrops, which is more more associated with continental-like storms and rainfall, those values generally lead to lower alpha values. So it turns out that alpha seems to be pretty much related to the type of rainfall regime that's occurring within the field of view of the radar. So I got a couple of things on here. One to the left over here is the graph of alpha versus the slope of differential reflectivity over reflectivity. And this was derived using distrometer data. And what the distrometer did was about 47,000 different DSTs with the distrometer data were available. And basically, we binned up the distrometer data into sections where we simulated the values for ZDR and reflectivity, and then also simulated what alpha would be. And so these triangles represent those bins of the data for the distrometer data. And then the dashed blue line is actually a nonlinear fit to the data, and then the red lines are actually the linear fit. And both of them, for the range of alpha that we were actually looking for, they fit pretty decently in through there. And so for the prototype algorithm, we're actually using a linear mathematical model to estimate alpha. But how are we actually estimating alpha in real time? Well, as we kind of have with this graph over here on the right, we're actually using the differential reflectivity versus reflectivity slope to basically identify what the dominant rain type is, and then use that mathematical formula to get at the actual alpha value that we need. So here's a graph where you have differential reflectivity in the y-axis, reflectivity in the x-axis, and then what we have are curves of what the average ZDR to Z slope was for Oklahoma storms, for storms in Florida, and then storms in Taiwan. And so for the first curve you see here, it slopes upward like this way. But if you notice, as you go down towards the subtropics in Florida and a little bit more or in the tropical regimes in Taiwan, you can see that these different curves become flatter in slope. And the reason why is what you're seeing is the differential reflectivity values for a given reflectivity band are smaller. And since ZDR is a proxy for the mean droplet diameter, you're talking about smaller droplets for a given reflectivity value as you go from continental down to tropical regions. So what we do to estimate the parameter alpha in real time is we take each half-degree tilt, we collect the ZDR and Z pairs that are within pure array, and then we bin the data. The bins are between reflectivities of 20 and 50 dBz. So we bin the data and we calculate the median ZDR for each one of those bins, and then we essentially fit a linear least squares fit to the median data. And so, for instance, here, this is a scatter plot with differential reflectivity here in the y-axis, Z in the x-axis. The blue dots here is just all the ZDR Z pairs that are in these reflectivity bands, and the contours here are just the numerical density of the data. So a lot of the, despite how spread out this scatter plot looks, most of the data is right in through here. And so the dashed red line with the triangles is the actual graph of the connection of the medians for each reflectivity band. And then the dashed blue line itself is the estimation of the slope. And from the slope, we actually get the value for alpha. So it would probably be useful to kind of know a little bit about the variability of alpha in some precipitation events. So I chose a couple of them right off the bat. One that's typically would be considered a continental-like rain event with severe storms. And then the other one is what's typically a tropical rain event. It's basically Hurricane Matthew from last year. So this current plot you see here is the variability of alpha in a continental rain event. This is from a severe storm event in eastern Nebraska and in western Iowa on the 3rd and 4th of June in 2014. So on the left-hand axis, left-hand y-axis, this is the value for alpha, and then the red trace itself is the actual alpha value. On the right-hand y-axis, this is the number of ZDR-Z pairs that were available for each one of those half-degree volume tilts we looked at. and then the blue line is the actual number of ZDRZ pairs. And then finally, the x-axis is time. But what I've done is I put different time periods attached to a dashed black line that connects to images of reflectivity and ZDR for each one of those periods, so you can get an idea of what was going on structurally within the precipitation event for a given value of alpha. So if you look at just reflectivity images, they're kind of spaced between the life cycle of this event. The thing you see on here is a lot of angry, hot red towers of convection. Reflectivity values at times getting above 60 dBz. Doesn't surprise me because there was a whole bunch of hail in this particular case. There also was a strong wind. And so if you look at the ZDR values, you can see within those convective cores, you can see colors of green to yellow and orange and red, and those reflect the higher ZDR values within the cores of the convection, and some of it a little bit around the peripheral as well. And so during that time period, alpha remained with time pretty much between the values of 0.015 and 0.02. And for if you're wondering why it's so constant at certain times, the bottom line is for this prototype, we did not allow alpha to go below 0.015 because of the suggestion of the disdrometer data leveling out near that value. So that's one of the reasons why you see it so straight through here, is that if it goes below 0.015, which it did during this time, the algorithm automatically goes and looks for the previous valid alpha value. And by the way, this is a 2 volume scan average of alpha. Now what's interesting here is there are a couple of peaks, right, starting around 2 something Z, and these peaks happen to correspond to times where the stratiform rain, the coverage of stratiform rain actually shifted the distribution of ZDR to Z, so that alpha actually had a little bit higher values at these times. So take a look at this. Alpha is pretty much confined between 0.015 and 0.02 for this severe storm case, and compare it to Hurricane Matthew. And now you see alpha up between about 0.025 and 0.035. And in fact, for a long period of time, pretty much from about 14 Z up to about 3 or so Z, alpha was generally above 0.03. And so if you look down at the reflectivity values, you can see that in this case, they're quite different from your continental storm event. What you're seeing moving into the radar field of view, which is generally shown by this dashed white line through here, is that mostly stratiform rain with embedded convection is occurring. If you look at ZDR, you can see that the values are quite a bit lower, even in the embedded convection. You don't hardly see any of the yellows, reds, or oranges that you saw with the convective storm event. In fact, you don't hardly see any of that until you get to about 144Z, which I show right here, where the eyewall is actually starting to approach the radar field of view, where the ZDRZ pairs are being collected from. So it's instructive just to kind of compare the reflectivity of the hurricane versus what you saw for the convective storms, and then look at alpha values. You pretty much you see just blue and light blue values through here, and a few light green, compared what you saw for the convective storm event. So if you compare straight up the alpha values for the severe convective storm event versus this middle plot here, which is again Hurricane Matthew, you can see that there's this parameter does a pretty good job of determining the predominant rain regime that's occurring across the radar field of view. However, there was a number of our cases that we looked at where at times you would have what looks like, I'm looking now at the third graph at the bottom, which is a trace of alpha for a Oklahoma MCS during 2015. Bottom line is alpha, for the most part, stay between about 0.015 and 0.02, kind of like that continental storm event. But at times, for several hours or more, it actually had alpha values that were a little bit more towards what you saw on the lower end of Hurricane Matthew. So it had characteristics of both tropical-like and continental-like rainfall. So we found a number of these cases where there's a mixture. There's where we actually had a lot of continental characteristics, but there's times where you got enhanced rainfall occurring, and some of the cores of the MCSs we're actually looking at in the validation part of this study. So for validation of the prototype algorithm, we calculated R sub A and RKDP in the hail cores using two different methods. One was what we talked about earlier. We assumed a fixed alpha for the duration of the precipitation event, and then we estimate alpha for every half-degree tilt. And for validation, we used data from 37 radars, 88D radars, on 56 different calendar days during the 2014 through 17 warm season. Now, most of these radars all those radars were in the eastern U.S., but as we get near the end of the talk, I will talk about some of the work we've done in the western U.S. as well. The R sub A estimates were used below the melting layer, and the melting layer was determined by using numerical model sounding data that was collected, while RFKDP was used in the strong convection. The results were then, in turn, compared to the operational dual pole QPE. When you look at the, I got to do a little bit of data housekeeping through here because you got some acronyms here. So when you look at these scatter plots here, this is just radar estimates versus gauge total. And so B refers to the gauge to radar bias. So if it's greater than 1, you're talking about an underestimate of the radar. And if it's less than 1, you're talking about an overestimate by the radar. R refers to root mean square error. MAE is mean absolute error, and C is correlation coefficient. The dots are colored by distance with the legend provided right over here. And at the top left is the temporal alpha, R sub A, R sub KDP. The top right is the fixed alpha. And the bottom left is the dual pole operational data, which uses RZ, ZDR, RFKDP, and RFZ. And what you can do is just look at the scatter plots between the temporal alpha and the dual pole operational data. And just take a look there and look at the gauge totals greater than 150 millimeters. And what you see there is that there's more of an underestimate for the dual pole data in that gauge total range than what you see typically for the temporal alpha. Also, if you look carefully, you'll also notice there's an overall more scatter with the dual pole operational data as compared to what you see for the temporal alpha data. When you look at the actual errors, there is a significant difference. In fact, we did some non-parametric statistical tests, and the difference in the mean errors between the two are significant to the 99.9% level. When you compare the temporal alpha to the fixed alpha, you can see by just assuming just the fixed alpha alone, you end up with more error as well as a higher underestimate bias in this case because we assume an alpha for a continental-like event, so a precipitation event. And the bottom line it says here is just using radial reflectivity alone is not enough to modulate the specific attenuation field to get accurate enough rainfall rates out of this. But if you come over here and look at the temporal alpha again, consider that basically these results are pretty darn good and that they're basically assuming an alpha for the entire radar field of view and such that we're still getting these results because the span of PDP and radial reflectivity is enough to modulate the specific attenuation rain rates and get relevant rates. This is just a comparison of 1 hour temporal alpha data to the dual pole operational data. This is for a smaller sample, 20 cases only. This is using the quality controlled automated rain gauges. The differences are more subtle because this is not accumulated over 24 hours. And 2, the automatic rain gauges sometimes are a little bit noisy. But what you can see is for gauges greater than 40 millimeters, you can see the dual pole is underestimating more often than what you see for the R sub A data. And 2, if you look carefully, you see there's generally less scatter with the R sub A data than what you see with dual pole data. And again, the difference in the mean and errors were significant. This is just an example from our data set of the mitigation of partial blockage that was advertised by Alexander's paper. On the left-hand side is the dual pol data from the Columbia, South Carolina NEXRAD, and this is the 24-hour QPE, so you can quite clearly see into there the regions of partial blockage. And then you compare that to the right for the R sub A data, and you see how that filled in quite nicely. So what I do now is I just add in the bias bubbles, the gauge radar bias bubbles. And so generally the warm colors reflect underestimates and the cool colors reflect overestimates. So what you see in this blockage area is a lot of underestimates for the dual pol data because of the partial blockage. And while there are some overestimates with the R sub A data, overall the performance is quite a bit better. And you can just tell by looking at the scatter plots below these QPEs. On the right over here is the R sub A scatter plots versus gauge totals. On the left here is the dual pol, and you can see a lot of the underestimates there. There's quite a bit of a big difference in the errors. But also, we're seeing cases where there is mitigation of the ZDR and Z calibration challenges. What you see here is radar QPE versus gauge totals. These are 24-hour totals. And on the left here is the dual pol data. On the right is the temporal R sub A, R sub KDP, QPE. This is for a 24-hour period on the 11th and 12th of August, 2016. And this is a day where the KLIX radar in New Orleans, ZDR was over 1 dB too low, and reflectivity was at least 3/4 dB too high. And so what happens, it resulted in really, really high 24-hour accumulations. On the other hand, for the temporal alpha, it did have an overestimate bias associated with it, but it had much more lower errors, and so it pretty much mitigated, in this case, the calibration challenges. So the prototype algorithm was integrated into MRMS to produce a new QPE product, which we call a Q3 dual pol, that generally uses R sub A below the melting layer, RZ within and above it, and then RF KDP where we believe hail was likely. And so basically we're doing kind of like we've done before. We bring in our radar input and our environmental data. We apply dual pol quality control on it. We estimate specific attenuation and specific differential phase fields, and then we create QPE with from those fields, and we merge them together. Then we merge that data with the reflectivity mosaic to have a synthetic that uses all three different relations there. So currently the prototype algorithm is running in real time on the MRMS research test bed for testing and evaluation. And this is a kind of a nice little history here. I think the basic research was pretty much done between 2012 and 2014. We spent about 1.5 years of it, or 2 years, on our experimental test bed where we're using archive data to further mature the algorithm that came from the basic research. And then last fall, we actually integrated it into the MRMS research test bed where it runs in real time for all the radars across the U.S. And so we hope to move this into operations by 2017 or early 2018. So the following are a little bit of our operational successes as well as some challenges as well. So here are scatter plots again, same acronyms as you had before, except now we have the new Q3 dual pol product, which uses R sub A, R sub KDP, and R sub Z, compared to the top left with Q3 radar only, which uses RZ. And then in the bottom left, you have the dual pol operational data, which uses RZ, ZDR, RFKDP, and RZ. And this is for data east of the Rockies. And this is about a 3-week sample, which is about the last, starts about the last time we made a major modification to the algorithm. And so what you can look at on through here is that on the top, looking at the top left, the Q3 dual pol compared to the dual pol data, operational data, you can see that there's quite a bit more scattered with the operational dual pol, and an underestimate bias is showing up as compared to what you see with the Q3 dual pol data. Now we show a little bit of an overestimate bias, And part of that is we'll talk about this here shortly, is we have a little bit of a challenge with some convective events where we have a little bit of an overestimate bias occurring. But if you compare the Q3 dual pole data to the Q3 rad data, even with this overestimate bias you see through there, we still have slightly lower errors and higher correlation. And oh, by the way, most of these precipitation events were convective, which regularly you have 10 to 15 knot winds gusting up to 20, 25 knots. So you're going to have some gauge undercatches occurring, probably about anywhere from 3 to 5%. So this overestimate bias here may actually be a little bit less than what you see. And this little bit underestimate bias you see in Q3 radar only at the higher gauge totals may actually be a little bit worse because of the gauge undercatch. These are some results that we captured from out west. Again, Q3 dual pole top left and dual pole operational on the bottom. And you can see that the Q3 dual pole does have less scatter and it does have lower errors and higher correlation, quite a bit higher correlation. When you compare Q3 dual pole to Q3 rad, the errors are closer, but you can notice more of an overestimate bias to the Q3 radar only data. And part of that's because it's picking up on the raindrops before it falls to the drier boundary layer area and evaporates. And some of that bias is probably due to raindrops evaporating before it reaches the ground. Here's just an example of some partial blockage being filled in for the Flagstaff radar out west. The left two images here is the QPE for 24-hour total at the top, and then the bottom is I just added the bias circles in through here. So you can see here that there's significant blockage to the southwest of the radar, and also blockage is shown up to the east and a little bit to the northeast as well. And a lot of that's been filled in with the Q3 dual pole data. And to the southwest, some of it has been filled in, and that just lets you know that the new technique actually can provide appreciable QPE for blockages up to 90%. But once it's 100% blocked, you can't do a whole lot more for that. Here's one of our challenges that we've been working with recently. In some of our convective rain events, the new QPE does exhibit a significant overestimate bias. So this happened to be the flash flood event that occurred out in Kansas City back in the last week of July. You can see the Q3 radar only product performed quite well during that event. And you can see the Q3 dual pole data had a significant overestimate bias. And it turned out that most of the overestimates were associated with reflectivity values that were generally greater than 40 dBz. Basically, it's the main convective regions. So our initial analysis indicate the overestimates were primarily related to the application of an alpha value, which is derived from the entire field of view of the radar. That was actually too high for the convection. So it was true that there was efficient rainfall and quite a number of heavy totals occurring as storms kind of trained over that area. But what I'm going to focus on here is this is a trace of alpha with times down here. These are just the number of ZDRZ pairs. But alpha is in green, and I want to concentrate on the time between the red dot dash lines here. And what you see is that the alpha values here tended to be range pretty much from about 0.021 up to about 0.027, and some of that's pretty darn high for applying to convection that's between 40 and 50 dBz. And so basically what we think is going on is that when you look at these scatter plots, you can see the convective, some of the higher convective some of the higher ZDRZ pairs on the scatter plot being over here, but the stratiform rain is in this region through here. And you can see the stratiform rain area is quite flat, and you had just enough of it within the radar field of view that it affected the overall alpha value to be a little bit higher, and so it was applied in the convective areas where reflectivities are pretty much between 35 and 50 dB, and that resulted in the higher rates than really were there. So in summary, well, I should say that's a good segue to that option number 3 I talked about earlier. This is one of the things we're looking into is ways of differentiating between estimating alpha in such a way that we differentiate between convective and stratiform rain. So moving on to my summary, we have created a prototype algorithm using the methodology of Alexander Rishkov's 2014 study. It's been tested on a large data set, and it showed to have better performance in the operational dual pole QPE. And what was unique was that the parameter alpha really is sensitive to the radar regime within the radar field of view, and that can be quite useful. The prototype algorithm has been integrated into MRMS as part of a new MRMS dual pole QPE product. And the new product, Q3 dual pole, is currently running in real time with evaluations made to determine where further improvements are needed. We've already made improvements along the way. That's helped us over some of the challenges we've seen, and we'll get to the challenge we're currently looking through now. So we hope the new QPE will be slotted for operational use in late 2017 or 2018. And this was just a nice example where we were able to take basic research and using the MRMS infrastructure, we were able to examine a large number of cases in a relatively short period of time and test the code in real time across the U.S. And in different geographical regions, as well as in different seasons. So that's all I have. If you want to find more info on MRMS technical documents, they can be found at these websites. We do have a new public website that can be found here that hosts and shows all of the operational MRMS products. And if you have any questions regarding MRMS and that comes to you after this forum, you can contact me through my email address here or Jin John, who's also online as well. Any questions?
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Steve, for powering through there, and your voice held out barely, I guess. So I really appreciate that. So at this point, I invite people on the webinar to raise your hand if you have a question, and we will unmute you. If not, you can also use the chat feature, and we can relay your question to Steve. I want to start out, Steve, with, and then this is kind of a challenge here. Could you try to walk us through the sort of the basic physics of the radar QPE, starting, like the basic RZ is one thing, and then we have the dual pole brought another set of physics to bear, and then lastly, what you're talking about now with the specific attenuation. I know that's kind of a challenge, but I think it might be helpful for us lay people, non-radar meteorologists, to sort of get what these significant physics enhancements are bringing to bear on the QPE problem.
Well, microwave radiation tends to be attenuated by moisture, raindrops. And so starting from the ground up, if you have a radar signal that goes down the radial, there's different things that can attenuate it and scatter the radiation, obviously. But if you have more rain along the radial of a radar, you can start attenuating its signal. And sometimes in really heavy rain events, and with tropical rain events, you actually can see that showing up in the radar data when you compare it with nearby radars. They're looking from a different direction. So what this technique is using is looking at the amount of attenuation that's occurring to the signal. And that's directly related to the amount of water content in through there. And I do have a reference at the last slide to Alexander Rishkov's paper that talks a little bit more in depth about that. And basically what you're kind of measuring is the amount of attenuation that's occurring, and that's related to water content. And so that's the difference on this technique. When you are involved with areas of ice, the attenuation, what happens is that in areas of hail in particular, you get a very, very strong signal back, and you end up with a very hot spot in attenuation, and that results in errors, okay? So you have to avoid ice if all possible. And if you have hail, it's pretty simple to do, because what you do is you use what's already available out there, specific differential phase, to mitigate those effects, and you substitute that in. For ROZ, what we're doing there is kind of like what we've done before. When we're in the melting layer, you really can't use ROZ and ZDR. You can't use, obviously, rain rates estimated from a specific attenuation because of the frozen precipitation part. What you got left there is reflectivity doing an estimate for rain rates. But what we do first is we correct the reflectivity values using the vertical profile reflectivity around the radar to kind of trim out where the bright banding is occurring. And then once that's occurred, we then apply a ROZ relationship to those echoes. And so what we do is to synthesize it all together. If you're below the melting layer, you're going to be using the specific attenuation. And then if you see areas where hail is likely, which we're just saying basically reflectivity greater than 50, although we're gonna be looking into other ways to fine tune that. But for now, we're looking at reflectivity greater than 50. That basically is where you substitute RF KDP into there. And then for reflectivity RZ, that's just, like I said, we're just using that within and above the melting layer. Does that help any what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think so. A follow up. So all in this formulation, all the R, whether it's A or KDP or Z, these are all temporally varying now in this approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand you saying R stands for rain rate when it's combined with a variable like A or KDP, and basically for each tilt radar, if we're talking about single radars, for each half-degree elevation tilt, you get a new value for R sub A and R sub KDP for the radar field of view. Okay.
Yes.
Does that make sense? And then you merge that with the reflectivity mosaic.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, going back to like the good old golden days, you had one ZR relationship applied all the time, fixed unless you change it for a different one, right? So now we're way far away from that in this approach, right? You have dynamically, the rain rates are applied at different layers under different conditions, and they're dynamically being updated as these parameters are changing. So that's much different from the old way of operating, right?
That's correct. And we started moving away from that when the dual pole QPE system came online, followed by the MRMS system, because both are using basically radar echo classification to determine what kind of rain rate relationship to use for an echo. And so what we've done here is we've got a little bit more different in that what we're trying to do is find a way to better estimate some of the moderate to high-end precipitation events to get a more accurate estimate for those types of events, because that's where your money's made when you're a forecaster in the counter. You want to be able to accurately depict with the lead time when your next flash flood would occur. And to do that, you need highly accurate QPE along the way. So this is one way of doing that, is to use a method that's a little bit more related directly to water content along a radial.
Okay, thanks. Let me, John, do we have any questions?
Yes, looks like Jeff Wallstriker.
Go ahead, Jeff. We're going to unmute you in a second. You're unmuted, Jeff. Go ahead.
Actually, it's Ken Johnson here.
All right, Ken, impersonating Wallstriker. Go ahead.
Backing off of Jeff's account. Steve, interesting approach and well presented. In one of your closing slides here, you mentioned the possibility of implementation in the end of this year or beginning of next year. I was wondering what kind of steps are being taken for this implementation, and particularly, is there any training plan for this?
Ken, you want to handle that one?
Ken Howard, let's unmute Ken. If
He's already unmuted.
you're unmuted, Ken, if you're there.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Steve. We are working with NCO to get onto their onboarding schedule. To be frank with you, I'm waiting to hear back about when there will be a slot open for us to onboard MRMS version 12. As Steve said, the current technique is running on our experimental research system in real time, and we continue to evaluate it. And as soon as a slot opens up on the IDP schedule, then we'll begin the process of onboarding it and making it available operationally.
Ken or Steve, it's Jeff Wallstreicher. So when that happens, especially from an SBN and an AWIP standpoint, would this replace the existing precipitation products, or at least the radar only existing precipitation products, or would this be a new field that would have to be added?
No, it would replace existing precip products, such as
Okay.
radar only.
That makes sense. Thanks.
All right, I see Sarah Jameson. We'll unmute you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I've got two quick questions here. The first one, I really like what you were showing with the beam blockage with terrain. Are you guys seeing the same kind of improvements with areas near the radar site? We get a lot of forward turns, mislabeled by dual pole, and we underestimate for, I know, multiple reasons, but that's one of the reasons we underestimate near the radar. And then secondly, have you had any flash flood events that you've been able to show where the R sub A seems superior to the dual pole?
Yeah, we have some. On the second question, there's events where we're performing better in terms of more accurate QPE. In terms of your first question, I have noticed a few cases. I have to pull them up, but I think I remember some cases where we're getting close to the radar where it looks like you're having a little bit of an underestimate there on the dual pole side, and we do slightly better. But now I'm talking about a single radar mode when I was working with the prototype. When you're using Q3 dual pole, you have the advantage of using other radars to kind of fill in some of those areas as you get closer into the radar and you start dealing with the Kona silence stuff and all that kind of issues, and it fills in there as well. But yeah, we have instances where we clearly see we have higher we actually have higher array rates and shoot. If I remember correctly, there was a lot of flash flooding occurring at this event right here in Columbia, South Carolina, on October 3rd and 4th, 15. Actually, it was like 3 days of it because you had an upper level low sitting off on the eastern U.S., and then you had Hurricane Joaquin offshore moving up the coast, well offshore, but moving up the coast, and it kind of pulled in some high moisture air into the region. And so it just sat there and rained and rained and rained for several days. And we did pretty good in some of those events there. I mean, this is an example here, just in that one blockage area, but over the entire radar field of view, if I remember correctly, we did quite well on this particular day. So yes, there are definitely cases where it is superior to the dual pole operational data, yes. Overall, when you look at the scatter plot, you can see it because whenever you have in totals greater than about 150 millimeters, that's basically what, 5 inches roughly, 6 inches, 6 inches roughly, 25 millimeters to an inch. So that's basically 6-inch totals right through here, and that's your dual pole data right through here if you look at the cursor on my screen. And then when you look at the R sub A data in that same area, we do a whole lot better in that area. So we are hitting. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
One of the things I know that really challenges us is our ability to accurately assess the rainfall rates? Because that's really where we tend to miss the flash flood cases is, our uncertainty with the rainfall rates. And it seems like from, covering the hail problem that we have with dual pole, that this may be more accurate rainfall rates than dual pole. Is that what you're seeing?
I think you're referring that RF-KDP and the operational RF-KDP relationship tends to overestimate in areas hail. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah. I know that that's just been the main area of struggle for us is those rainfall rates. So, I mean,
actually, we're actually using a different RF-KDP relationship than the operational one. It's one that Alexander Rishkov developed for this this algorithm, in part due to some of the results he'd seen with overestimates related to RF-KDP and hail, using the operational version. And so we're using a different version that doesn't pipe quite as high for hail. And two, we actually cap it. We cap the RF-KDP rates to not go above 150 millimeters per hour, because at that point your KDP values are pretty darn high. When KDP gets to be like 7, 8, or 9, shoot, man, your rates are going to be they're going to be too high anyway. So we end up putting a cap on there for RF-KDP.
Okay, that's good.
Well, we are using a different relation other than the operational dual pole data.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Other questions for Steve and company?
He looks like Daniel. Go ahead. Someone else have one in?
Daniel? Oh, go ahead. Daniel.
Yes, I thought at the end you were...
Dennis Miller here. Go ahead.
Hi. I thought at the end you were saying that even this new method overestimates in some situations. Do you have a plan to address that presently?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it with the last slide. Let me move to that slide right quick. There it is. So we recognized that for the Kansas City case, we were having overestimates because we're applying an alpha that was too high. And one of the things we're trying to look into is to see if there's a better way of differentiating between the convective echoes and applying either apply RF-KDP for reflectivity values greater than 45 dBz and see if that will reduce it. The other thing we're looking into is maybe finding a way to better break out the stratiform array away from the convective data. That's kind of where we're at right now. The first step we want to look at is just looking to see of using RF-KDP for a lower reflectivity value. And from there, we're kind of bouncing around several ideas what to do next that I don't really want to go into at this point. But kind of give you an idea, we do have an idea where to go. And two, just from having it run on real time and having it exposed to all kinds of different situations in all kinds of geographical regions, it's given us an idea of how to really wring this algorithm out and get it working as sufficient as we need it to be in order for it to be put in operation. So to answer your question, yeah, the first step we're going to do is look at applying a lower threshold for using RF-KDP on there.
Okay, thank you.
Question from Daniel. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel Melendez.
Yes. So if there was some way that you could change the scanning of the radar, would that provide a way to further refine the alpha? I guess that's where the problem is. And from what I gather in your presentation, the larger errors are related to the changes in the drop diameters and the presence of ice. So it would not be obvious to me, but would that help in any way?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you right now that what we do for estimating specific attenuation, we use quite religiously, we're using the half-degree elevation tilt because that's the closest towards the ground and far, and it gives you a little bit more distance to work with to stay away from the melting layer. And so that half-degree tilt is what we're looking for. Right now with sales and meso sales, we get lots of half-degree tilts. And by the way, that really helps your QPE because instead of having these, instead of having little gaps in between, getting little gaps of QPE as an echo moves across an area because you're getting only an estimate every 5 minutes, those extra sales cuts actually helps and fills it in, and you actually get a little bit of a QPE estimate every 1 to 2.5 minutes. So that kind of fills in nice. But in terms of a different elevation scan, I mean, we want to stay with about half-degree. I don't know, just off the top of my head, of any other kind of strategy at the moment. Does that help any what I'm saying, or does that leave you confused and dazed?
Well, that's
confused, as per Jimmy Page.
That's the best answer today, right? So thanks.
All right.
Hey, Steve, so this is Steve Smith again. Just following up on, I mean, this is, as you pointed out, this is really kind of revolutionizing the way that we do this through the MRMS system. But I was wondering, I mean, is it true that you're still dependent, I mean, we're still dependent on the hard radars being well calibrated for this to work. And so that does not overcome or replace the need to keep the individual radars that feed in MRMS well calibrated from the traditional sense. Is that a correct statement?
Well, first of all, we always want a well calibrated network, and Jessica Schultz is online and she can speak to that more than me. But what I'll say is that the technique does show evidence of mitigating calibration challenges. I've shown on the screen here, I've shown on the screen here, I have 3 different levels of data. The far 2 panels here, these are scatter plots. One's dual pole and one's the temporal alpha. And then these are just some reflectivity images I took just to give you an idea of what kind of precip event we had. And so you're looking at an event from an Oklahoma MCS here at the top. This is one of those days in Columbia, South Carolina, back in October 2015. In the middle, and then in the bottom was the severe convective storm case from the Omaha radar. And what you see on here in red for each of these scatter plots on the dual pole scatter plot, you'll see what looks to be Z appear to be about 1 dB cool for the top panel here. For this Oklahoma MCS, ZDR seemed to be somewhat calibrated at that time. And so what you're looking at here is you see the distinct underestimate with the dual pole data, but the dynamic alpha did quite well. And then in the middle plot, this just happened to be the radar was well calibrated, and a lot of the problems here for the dual pole, I think, was some of the partial blockage that was going on. But for the bottom here, this was data from the Omaha radar, and what you see here is that both of them are showing an overestimate bias. But what you're seeing is that there was, and the reason part of that is because there's about maybe it was 1.5 dBz warm. It's kind of hard to get hardcore, no kidding reflectivity calibration comparisons. But anyway, the bottom line, it was hot. The radar was hot. The dual pole data showed about an overestimate bias of about 0.65. Compared to what we're showing with the dynamic alpha here. And I believe this is hourly data I'm looking at. I have to go back and check. The bottom line is that we show evidence through here, as well as this is the more obvious case with the data in Louisiana, which really, the truth is, I think, and Jessica would know more than me, I thought it was a maintenance issue, some kind of cable issue that caused the ZDR to be so low and resulted in the really high QPE values for the dual pole data. But we were using the same data. We didn't make a correction. We used the same ZDR versus Z data, and we ended up getting a better QPE out of it. It wasn't perfect, I mean, there's still an overestimate bias you can see there, and we still have significant errors. But considering that the DDR was off so much, we did pretty good actually through there. So yes, we always want a calibrated, well-calibrated radar network. It makes life easier for everyone, and that's what the Radar Operations Center has been diligently working on for a number of years. They're still working on it and making progress in there. But we do show in this technique evidence where it is mitigating some of those challenges. Does that help any?
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks for sticking with us and with your voice challenges. We're at the top of the hour now, so I'm going to have to cut off the questions. Really excellent talk, Steve. I really appreciate it, and the team at NSSL and OU Sims for this really important work. As we know, the MRMS system is really a foundational system, operational system for NOAA now, and this work in this rather esoteric area, it really raises all boats. So improvement in QPE has all these downstream benefits from hydro, from different model assimilation, et cetera, et cetera. So although it's sort of an unsung task and a limited group working on it, this is really, really important stuff. And I thank you for making the effort to put this presentation together and share with us today. I'll remind folks that the whole talk here, including my voice right now, is being recorded, and we'll upload that to the VLabForum website so you can share with folks this really excellent work. I want to remind as well that there's going to be an MRMS stakeholders meeting at the NOAA Center for Weather and Climate Prediction in College Park on November 13th of this year. So all you MRMS fans or people who want to learn more about MRMS can keep an eye on for the agenda, et cetera. But that's October 13th in College Park. You can put a hold on your calendar, and lots more MRMS information will be provided at that stakeholders meeting. And finally, coming up in September for the VLabForum, September 27th, you can also put this on your calendar. We're going to have a presentation by Tracy Hansen of OAR GSD, as well as Greg Stump, OU Sims MDL, on the Probabilistic Hazard Information Hazard Service Project, which is a part of the FACETS effort, otherwise known as Fee Hazard Services. So welcome and invite you to join us on September 27th for that very interesting and timely talk. So without further prolonging this, thanks everyone, and we are